Hello, everyone. My name is Brennan Pugh. Today on the show, we have Marie Robertson with us, and we're going to be talking with her about her writing process, her books, and how she got into this whole self publishing thing. So, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hey, thanks. I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Doing well. We were just talking before. I'm a little frazzled because we're opening a business, and so it's been a long day, but a good day.
Cool.
Yeah. So, before we get started, why don't we just have you tell us a little bit of who you are, how you got started with writing, a little bit of that beginning journey.
Okay. Well, it's been pretty much a lifelong journey, actually. I have always been a writer. Even when I was a little kid, I would write my own stories. And right around second or third grade, I wrote a story about some kids exploring a cave. And I vaguely remember there was a magical ham sandwich involved and a ghost. Um, and the teacher dubbed me the writer, and it sort of stuck. And ever since then, I have been going in and out of kind of a long love affair with writing fiction in particular. I spent a long time thinking I could only write short stories and that I didn't have the focus to actually write a novel. But then I did manage to write a novel. And so that's how we get here today. So it's
Yeah,
one of many hats I've worn, but it's the hat that I've loved the best. And I'm determined to keep that hat on now and not take it off for
yeah,
anybody.
that's great. I love how you call it a love affair because I feel like that's so true of everyone's always, even if you love writing, you're still wrestling with it always, like, because it's a hard thing to do, you know?
It is. And people who haven't done it don't quite get that, I don't think. I had a baby writer that I was talking to who was just starting. They were in that, oh, I think I have a novel in me phase.
Yeah.
And I said to them, don't do this because you think you have a novel in you, because
Hmm.
this is hard. Do it because you love it and you have to do it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you won't get through it. You won't make it through it, and you might even finish the novel. But then getting the novel in front of other people is a whole nother ball of wax. So
Hmm.
yeah, they were momentarily offended until I explained what I
Yeah.
meant.
I just saw a quote today from I think it was from C.S. Lewis, and he said something. This is not exact, but something to the effect of, "Don't become a writer because you want to be a writer. Become a writer because you want to tell great stories
Hmm.
and you have something inside of you want to tell. But don't do it
Yes.
just to be a writer because that's a bad
Yeah.
idea."
Yeah. If you go into it saying I'm going to be a writer, well, there are
Mm.
lots of avenues to that. You can write journalism. I did that for 20 years. That was not writing.
Mhm.
That was a different thing. But it's really hard to, especially people who want to pursue publishing and getting published. And it's, I don't want to crush anybody's dreams. That's the last thing on the list of things that I want to do. But sorry, I'm trying to untangle a cat here.
That's all right.
Um, but the whole idea that you write a novel and then you get it published doesn't happen that way for anybody. Not on the trad side, not on the indie side.
Mhm.
There's so much more work that goes into it, and the reality of it is that it's hard. It's hard
Mhm.
work. It is an entirely separate career.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's always harder than you think. Like I think I mean I think everyone has that moment where they're like, I'm gonna write, like you said, like I got a book in me, I'm gonna write a book. And then, you maybe write a couple chapters that are fairly easy or you think they are, and then all of a sudden it gets pretty hard pretty quick. And then you realize how much goes into it. And then not to mention once you get through that first draft phase, now you actually have to edit the thing, and then you gotta market it and there's just so many more things that go into it than
mhm.
just writing it. And
Mhm.
so yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because if you don't like what you've written, you're in terrible trouble because you're going to have to read it 18,000 times between the
Mhm.
time you finish it and the time it's published. So,
Yes. So you have this book that just or came out recently called Nothing Larger Than These Stars.
that's
And
right.
is so this your first novel that you've like full length
It
novel?
is. Yes, it is my first published full-length novel. It's a science fiction mystery. It's a different sort of science fiction. It's heavy on the fiction and lighter on the science. So you're not going to find aliens, you're not going to find military, you're not going to find pew pew. You're going to find characters who are trying to do the best they can in extraordinary situations, who care about each other and who care about the place they live.
Mhm.
So from that perspective, it may not appeal to hard sci-fi readers. It's a different kind of science fiction. It should appeal to anybody who really likes a good story. But there's a whole list of a lot of folks who have been interested in kind of reclaiming the science fiction space for a more sort of peaceful, less kind of hyper aggressive, militaristic sort of approach. We've had a
Mhm.
lot of those kinds of, and they're great books. I would never shade John Scalzi. He is the man. But you know, there's room for everybody, and this is a little bit of a different kind of science fiction.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great thing. I mean, there's a room for everybody, and I agree with you that we do have a lot of like science fiction right now is very science fiction, very science fiction. And so having something that's a little lighter, I think is a great that's
Yep.
awesome. Where did the idea for this come? Where was the kind of like how long did it take you? Like all those kind of details about this story.
Yeah. Well, I started actually I just got it into my head that it was time to go back to the thing that I had wanted to do all my life that I had never gotten around to doing. And so in 2018, I decided to jump in to NaNoWriMo, and I had 4 or 5 ideas. My work usually starts with a scene that presents itself in my head. And so
Mhm.
I'll write down that scene. I won't necessarily know anything about the scene other than the characters that are in it and whatever happens between them in the scene. I had a selection of different scenes. And so for my NaNoWriMo attempt, I picked this one scene that oddly enough, that I felt like I was the least attached to. And so it wouldn't matter if I screwed it up.
Mhm.
Um, and started with that and started writing. And I didn't win NaNoWriMo that year, but I got 35,000 words into the novel. And then I finished it the next year. I finished it in May of 2019. And then the edits and the rewrites began.
Mhm.
Um, so I knew already that there were parts of it that didn't work, didn't feel like they worked. And I spent a lot, and it was insanely long. It was 150,000 words long, which is too
Yeah.
much. And I put a lot of effort into streamlining things, making sure things felt like they were moving the story forward, that we were really providing stuff that was of interest and of value to the reader. Got feedback from critique partners and beta readers and all that kind of good stuff. And uh, did a lot of edits on it. Felt like I was going to query it. Had always planned to query it to traditional publishing to agents. And started on the query rounds in it, and then the pandemic hit. And there was a pandemic in the book,
Mhm.
which one of the agents that talked to me, who, and I've got some great feedback from agents. Agents have
Yeah.
been super helpful people in this journey, even though I'm an indie author now and self-published. Uh, but one of the agents that I spoke with said, "You probably don't want to do this after what we've just experienced, and let me just put it to you this way, there are a whole lot of ways to kill a lot of people effectively that
Yeah.
don't involve a pandemic."
Yeah.
So I went back and took the whole pandemic part out, and that's when I realized that the whole approach to that was problematic. So that was another rewrite. A couple years later, I'm still querying it. I'm getting different kind of responses, yes, no. And to a certain extent, the feedback that I was getting was, this is a great story. You're a great storyteller. You know how to write. The publishing market is not in this place right now.
Yeah.
And you have two choices. You can either put it away and wait for publishing to get back to that place, and it will, but we don't know when, or you can indie publish it.
Mhm.
And the way another agent friend of mine put it was, there may not be a publisher for this right now, but there are always going to be readers for this kind of book.
Yeah.
So that's when I decided to indie publish it. And of course, I had to take it through one more round of querying, saying, okay, I'm going to take this through one more time, I'm going to get feedback. nobody's going to be interested in that skin. And of course, I got like 3 full requests out of that round.
Yeah.
So, but I had already decided to go ahead and
Mhm.
indie publish, and so I have, and
Yeah.
that's how I got here. It took a while.
Yeah. That's awesome. So it sounds like you had a pretty good experience then with querying,
I did.
and you found all that um very useful
Mhm.
information then.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of it has to do with how you go about it. Instead of just kind of scattershotting agents with written queries and, on Query Manager and hitting them up through, their standard process, uh, I've made it a point to attend conferences, in particular the Atlanta Writers Conference, but there are lots of other good writing conferences around the country that will do this, that enable you
Mhm.
to actually sit down and talk to an agent when you pitch them.
Yeah.
So in those instances, you're sitting there in front of them. They've already seen your query letter, so they know what you're pitching to them. You have 10 or 15 minutes to actually talk to the agent. And it was super good for feedback. And, people get to know you and they understand where you're coming from. And you're not just another, name in this giant slush pile. So
Mhm.
from that perspective, it was super helpful, and I got to know a lot of these folks individually, both agents and editors at major publishing houses who I'm still in touch with today. And yeah, that's really making the individual personal connection with them is really the way that you get the best feedback from those folks on the trad pub journey.
Yeah.
So, and taking advantage of things like the mixer, the cocktail hour. I can't tell you how many people said that, "Oh, I'm not going to that. That's stupid." Well, I went and sat down next to an agent who talked to me about the book that I wasn't querying for half an hour.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That it's in person is always better. And
mm,
if you can, if you can meet the people, and again, like you said, it's like otherwise you just kind of end up like another name on the pile and they might get to you. And I find it fascinating you had such a good experience, because I've talked to a lot of people who have not had such a good experience. And I think, to your point, I think, yeah, if you can get those in-person
mhm,
interactions, you
yeah,
do have a better experience for sure.
yeah. And I've had, relatively negative experiences with agents, like the one who I was allegedly taking a class from, who, when I asked, "Can I query you?" And she said, "Yes." And then I sent her the query and got a rejection within 24 hours.
Oh
So,
wow.
like, if you don't want to see it, just say you don't want to see it.
Yeah.
But, I've had those, but far and away they have been positive. And I think a lot of it comes from maintaining an awareness that agents are people
Hmm.
and that they want to like your book. They really want to.
Hmm.
There are a lot of people who treat them like they're the gatekeepers or the enemy or something,
Yeah.
and that's not really who they are. I mean, yeah, there's some stinker agents out there, but most of them are good people trying to do the best they can, and they really do want to help you and they want you to succeed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Very cool. So within this process, let's talk a little bit about your writing process. Do you What's kind of your favorite part of the writing process? And then how do you kind of, are you more of a plotter? Do you more of a just, discovery write it?
mhm.
How does that work for you?
I'm kind of in the middle. I am 95% a discovery writer. Um, and I'm one of those people who, the characters talk to me and they tell me, I just kind of transcribe what they're saying is going on in a lot of cases. But I also do kind of have an idea of where things are going. I'll have an overarching, this is going to this end,
Hmm.
and it might be scene related, it might be chapter related, or it might be for the whole novel. But I have start out with an idea of a direction in which it's going.
Yeah.
And then hopefully the characters play fair and they go in the same direction. They don't always. And but yeah, it's mostly discovery writing with a little bit of hybrid in there. My favorite part of the process is when it's going good. That's
Mhm.
kind of the thing. When you're writing a scene and it just takes off and stuff is just flying out of your fingers and you're not even having to think about things. That's when it's the best. Um, and that's absolutely my favorite part. And of course, my least favorite part is probably marketing,
Yeah.
like
I
everybody
don't
else.
think anybody likes marketing.
And I even have a marketing background, but there's just the book industry is just so weird.
Yeah,
And another friend of mine who is a marketer was looking at all these, I mean, but not books. Her background is software and that kind of
yeah,
stuff. And she's like, some of the stuff that you guys do to market your books doesn't make any sense from a, a professional marketing standpoint. And I'm like, yeah, but the stuff you do to sell a widget to somebody doesn't necessarily work when you're selling them a book, because
mhm,
you're not trying to solve a problem for them. You're trying to invite them into a world. You're
mhm,
trying to, you're selling yourself really. And it's
yeah.
hard and it's weird and it's complicated. So
Yeah, because I think readers, I mean, I'm like this, like you rarely read one book from an author. Like
right.
you get invested in the author and then pretty much whatever they write, you at least cursory check out, if not,
Yeah.
buy.
Yeah.
So, and then also there's a lot of authors where like whatever they put out, I'm going to get it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it is, I agree. That's a great way to put it. I think you're not selling a widget, you're selling you as the author.
Yeah. A
And
relationship.
yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Because
And it's
especially
hard.
it is hard. I think especially too because you end up with, you end up. It's kind of like if you watch a TV show, like if you was something like Friends. Like everyone watches the show, you watch it 100 times, and then you feel like you're best friends with the characters.
Hmm.
Same thing with an author. You follow them, they put out new books, you read the books, and eventually you just feel like you know
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. And I know that if we're talking about goals, that's one of my long
Hmm.
term goals is to be to someone else what Martha Wells is to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, and another one of my goals is to see somebody at Dragon Con cosplaying one of my characters. So that's
Yeah.
pretty high on the list too.
That would be fun. Yeah, I want to make it out to Dragon Con sometime and I'd love to go. This sounds awesome, but
It's absolutely wonderful and insane. I haven't been in a few years, but I'm still part of the Dragon Con groups, and I don't think it's changed at all, except it's gotten bigger and
yeah.
crazier
Yeah.
and more itself. So,
Yeah, that's really cool. So it on here says part of a duology. So you have
mhm.
another one for this series.
Yep.
And then do you have more books in this world? Is this something you
Oh,
want to
yeah.
continue? Yeah.
Yeah, there are other things coming up in this world. I'm getting some interesting feedback now from readers about characters that they would like to see have their own stories. So that's always a possibility. The duology will wrap up the current goings on Iona, but there is still this whole other world. I'm also working on a series of short stories that are set in this world that involve some overlapping characters from the novels.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of potential stuff to come out of this particular world. Um, might even branch off and follow a different set of characters and a different adventure and show how they get to some of the main places. Meridian Station plays a big role in the second book, and it's a space station that's kind of
Mhm.
a way station in between different parts of this galaxy. And some of my characters wind up there, and I think it would be interesting to kind of explore how they got there, why they would choose to give up the life that they had on their home world
Mhm.
and choose to live on a space station. So lots of different options there. And of course, I also have like novels in other genres that are going to. I have a fantasy novel that I think is probably going to be, well, it's a alt historical time travel novel that
Okay.
I've had a lot of trad pub interest in. So that may be the one that takes me over to that gets me over to trad. But there's also a bunch of other science fiction premises bumping around in my head. So lots of
Yeah.
things potentially coming down the pipe.
My brother writes too, and so he's kind of the person I talk to a lot about when I write. And he asked me once, he's like, "So do you have like other ideas?" I was like, "No, I pretty much have this one world. Like that's all I got. Like I have a million ideas in this one
In
world,
this
but
world.
like I have no other worlds. Like this is all I got." So, but I talked to someone not too long ago that everything for them they just think in like standalone books and they're not
Mm.
connected and there's but like that's it. And you know it's just so interesting how everyone's creativity is so different.
It is really different, and I think one of the issues is going back and kind of redoing the world building. I've gotten so used to living in this world, it's a little bit hard for me to think outside of it now. So
Hmm.
when I start writing something that's a science fiction based piece, my brain immediately goes to the things that I know about this world instead of creating something different.
Hmm.
And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I mean, I would like to branch out and do, some other things, and maybe I will if I have time. It's
Hmm.
time. Time is everything. What?
Time is everything.
Jeez.
Yeah.
And and it's really amazing how things can just throw your creativity off altogether. Like the whole situation dealing with a sick cat, that's just kind of like taking up a big chunk of my brain. Letters from the IRS saying, "Oh, we didn't get this payment that you sent."
Hmm.
Ugh.
Anytime I get a letter from the IRS, you just go, whoo, you know,
It's
even if it's a good one, you still kind of,
like,
you know,
wait, what? What did
yeah.
I do?
So, what are some of your? You've mentioned a couple authors, but what are some of your kind of big influences? Like, if you could
Oh,
pick,
wow.
3 or 4 that are like these are the authors, who would that
Well,
be?
definitely Martha Wells. Just I love her voice and the way that she, especially the Murderbot series, the way that she just inhabits Murderbot and his voice. Their voice is so clear and
Hmm.
so distinct. Um, and I love that, and the storytelling is terrific. Arkady Martine is another one, just really inventive, world, and again, the strong female character, which I really respond to. Um, Ruth Anna Emrys, had a really cool take on the whole idea of the near future, Earth, what the
Hmm.
world could be like in her book A Half-Built Garden, and I really enjoyed that, and was kind of delighted with her kind of portrayal of alien species and stuff like that. So,
Hmm.
and then just for pure voice on the fantasy side, Lee Bardugo. If I
Hmm.
read a few chapters of Shadow and Bone before I start writing, I am able to write better. The
Yeah,
voice thing just kind of gels for me, and I'm able to write better and faster and have it be more to authentically myself because she is so good at that. So,
yeah, yeah. Her, I haven't read her books yet, but they are on my list of my to get to.
mhm.
But she's really kind of exploded in the last couple of years. Like she's got tons of stuff out.
Absolutely. And, the Netflix show, it's kind of funny because Shadow and Bone has been out for a really long time. And
Hmm.
then the Netflix series popped up. And of course, they redid things a bit, but not in a bad way, I don't think. But yeah, I enjoy her work. I haven't loved like the most recent stuff. Like Ninth House didn't blow me away the way
Hmm.
Shadow and Bone did. But something for everybody. There are plenty of people who absolutely just died over that. So,
Yeah. How do you feel about we can maybe dive into a little bit of this. How do you feel about when like adaptations and stuff? I there's obviously you can never make a show or TV or movie like a book, but
mhm.
do you like things to remain pretty faithful? Are you okay if they stray? Like what's the
It's going to depend on the book. I mean,
Mhm.
certainly, I feel like for Shadow and Bone in particular, since we were just talking about that, it made sense to combine the Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows together because they are related. They are, it's not even tangential, they are tightly related. But they had to take a lot of stuff out of both of the books in
Mhm.
order to do that. And I feel like those might have been some missed opportunities. I don't object to adaptations because you can't make a book, like you said, you can't make a book visual. You really can't. So much of that goes on in people's heads.
Mhm.
Um, so, I appreciate people doing what they can to be true to it
Mhm.
enough, or true to the spirit of it, or true to the voice of it. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know, it would be interesting to see how somebody would adapt something that I've written, because I kinda can't even really imagine it.
Yeah. I so the thing I always kind of come back because we've said it a few times, but you can't make any like a book. So you have to be okay with some changes. But I always draw the line with Lord of the Rings is a great
Mm,
example. The movies are probably as faithful as they could have been.
Mhm.
And I remember hearing people being upset, like Tom Bombadil wasn't in the story in the
Right.
movie, and it's like, well, he actually doesn't really play any major part of the story. He's just in there.
Yeah,
So
and he's a
taking
much
him,
loved character, but he's just in there. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so, but then conversely, I don't know if you watched the Wheel of Time series at all.
Yes. Yes, I've
Um,
watched that.
I felt like, you can tell me your opinion. I felt like the first season wasn't even the same story
Mm-mm.
at
I'd
all.
agree with you. I agree with you.
And
They changed so much.
yeah, and I mean, so like the thing that works like Lord of the Rings, like they changed some things and different character, but like for the most part, the story beats are pretty much
Mhm.
all there. And I remember I had just read Eye of the World, and then the show came out, and I thought these are not the same at all.
Mm-mm.
They
Mm-mm.
they took the names and the characters, and that was kind of it. So
Yeah, and
I
just went off and did whatever with them. Yeah. I had some issues with it too, and I felt like there were some missed opportunities in there. I mean, that book series in particular has a lot of really striking visual stuff,
mhm,
and the way that the relationships are overlap and interplay is kind of the core of the whole series.
mhm,
And they just sort of went they just sort of blew all that stuff up.
yeah.
And I don't think it's bad, you know,
Yeah, I thought the
but
same thing. I was like, it's not like I don't think it's a bad show, but
mhm,
it's not the book. Or it's not the story, you
yeah.
know.
It's sort of like the adaptation of Ready Player One. I mean,
Hmm.
the movie was a lot of fun, but it wasn't Ready Player One, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I grew up in that whole era of like so when like the Lord of the Rings movies came out, I was 10 or 12, and so I was kind of doomed because I had Lord of the Rings came out and there was like Pokemon and Star Wars, the Star Wars prequels when I was like the most impressionable time for me. So I was pretty destined to be a nerd. So,
well, I saw Star Wars 17 times the summer it came out.
oh wow.
So that tells you, you know, what my destiny was.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just came across in some comic books I got found the original comic book adaptation of the first movie,
Oh, wow.
and it's really cool. It's fun to flip through.
Gosh,
So,
what a find.
yeah, it's pretty fun. So, we've talked about your writing process. How about can we get into a little bit of your writing practice? So, like,
Mhm.
when do you write? How do you write? Are there things that you do to kind of help stay motivated, disciplined?
Yeah, all that
how do you go
stuff.
about writing?
Well, I am like the world's worst at discipline,
Hmm.
really suck at it. And so I have to use a whole lot of tricks to kind of make myself do it. Um, and the thing is, I love writing, and pretty much everybody who writes, I think, feels this way. I love writing, but it's sort of like there are 18,000 different things in a day that will get in your way. And I'll feel guilty about not doing those things because I'm writing, and then I'll feel guilty about writing and not doing those things. And so it just kind of the downward spiral, you know how that works.
Hmm.
Um, what I try to do to get out of that is to keep myself a little space of time every day where I just write. And it doesn't even have to be a lot. I was really heavy into setting word goals, word count goals and stuff like that for a while. And then I found that that just made it harder for me. I would not reach a word count goal and then I'd beat myself up because I hadn't reached the word count goal and all this other kind of jazz. So now my goal is just to daily advance the story on whatever the primary thing is that I'm working on. And I let that definition be anything. Okay.
Hmm.
It can be anything. It means if I want to go back and edit a scene that I've already written, that counts. If I write new scenes, that counts. The one stricture that I have on that is that I have to write at least 2 new scenes a week. And hopefully, those scenes, you know, move it along enough and without having a word count attached to it too. Sometimes they'll be really short scenes, sometimes they'll be longer and more interesting. But that way I'm able to get into it a little more and without the pressure of checking to see how many words I've written. Because
Hmm.
I'm one of those idiots who I'll write something and then I'll backspace over the whole thing. You know, it's just
Yeah.
like So it's not the easiest thing I ever do, but that's what I'm doing right now to try to help me kind of stay on track. And um, I have a good bit of the sequel to Stars already written. The working title for it is Beyond the Stark Horizon, and I need to get another like 30,000 good words in on it before it's ready to go to the editor. But I feel like I'm making good headway, and if I just keep up with this kind of discipline and try not to beat myself up about it, then I should make it, she said
Yeah.
optimistically.
Yeah, I agree. So I made a few videos about this on the channel about time-based goals as opposed to word count goals. Because
Yeah.
the same exact thing, I'd be like, I'm gonna write 1,000 words a day or whatever. And then I wouldn't hit it, and then I would beat myself up about it, and you
Mhm.
get in the whole thing. And so then what I found was, if I just say, okay, today I have 20 minutes.
Yes.
If I can write for that 20 minutes, then that counts. Doesn't matter what I write, how much I write, or I've got a half hour, I've got an hour today. I find that I get more done because I'm
Mhm.
like, because the other thing you can't account for is if you have ideas that day. So
Yeah. Yep.
sometimes I sit down to write and I just have all the ideas in the world and they just come out and no big deal. And then other days I sit there and go, I got nothing. So, but I think over time, if you do more of a time based, like I'm just going to write when I can, do as much as I can without the pressure of the word counts, I think you end up writing more.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's one of the things that stood out to me after I had that one sort of success with NaNoWriMo. I actually won NaNoWriMo a couple of years ago, and but it was because I stopped paying attention to my word count.
Hmm.
And just at the end of the month, I went back and I was, oh, let's see how much I wrote. And I had written 65,000 words. But,
Yeah.
if I had been trying to get, whatever the number is, it was 1,662 words a day, that would not have happened. That would
Yeah.
not have happened that way. So,
Because one day you might have written 500 and then the next day you write 2,000.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
what I found.
I have very well-meaning friends who try to, encourage me to do word sprints with them, and they're like, "Oh, and you can figure out how many words you can write in a sprint, and then you'll know how." And I'm like, "Yeah, no, that does not work for me."
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Are you, so it sounds like you're still open to traditional publishing.
Yeah.
So is that kind of a goal? Is that just like if it happens, it happens? How are you navigating that?
It's definitely an if it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
I intend to continue writing the kind of sci-fi I want to write and independently publishing it because I feel like there's a stronger readership for it on the indie side than there might be on the trad side. The time travel historical fantasy, I have had a lot of positive input, people saying, oh, yeah, we want to see this. This is exactly what we want to try to shop to publishers. So that one's going to go the trad route for a while. And if it gets picked up, I'm going to set a time limit for it. If it gets picked up, great. If it doesn't get picked up, I'll indie publish that one also. I
Yeah.
also have some other things floating around, like there's a rom-com in the works kind of stuff. So that stuff obviously does really, really well indie published. So
Hmm.
it feels like it just makes sense to me to kind of cherry pick the ones that have the best chance to do, the best in indie publishing and let those be indie published. Trad publishing is such a long, drawn out thing. And
Hmm.
you have literally zero guarantees with
Yeah.
TradPub. So, my interest there is if this is something that would pique an agent and a publisher's interest, then great. It would be nice to uh, get something with a big five that maybe somebody else might actually want to market. Although all the trad authors that I know, and I'm friends with quite a few, are having to do most of their own marketing these days.
Hmm.
So, you know, if you can get uh, a high point, then that's great. If not, I'm happy to indie publish because I have a lot of faith in the indie community, and I think people are really understand now that indie published books are not necessarily lower quality or any way in any way deficient than from trad published books. So,
Yeah.
And working with bookstores is kind of a head trip, so that's
Yeah. It's a nice
sometimes it's
it's
fun and sometimes it's not.
yeah. It's nice that we live in a world now where there's so many options. You know,
Yeah.
it used to be like you couldn't indie publish, and then it became, well, if you do indie publish, it's only because you couldn't get regular published. Well, now we're in this world where it's like most people I don't think really care whether you're
Mm-mm.
traditional or indie or whatever. So it's really nice to have those options, and I think um, it's opened up the door for so many more new stories. I'm just an advocate
Yeah.
for stories. Like, I don't really care how
Yeah.
they show up. So
Yeah.
I think it's just opened up such a bigger market for so many more stories to come out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is still, in some people's minds, an element of a kind of a cachet to having been traditionally published, but it basically, traditional publishing is a giant swamp run by clueless lizard people.
Hmm.
And we learned this from the DOJ Simon and Schuster trial and the testimony. And we had a lot of very highly paid publishing executives get on the stand and go, I don't know how this works. I don't know how we sell books. I have no clue. And when you look at some of the practices of traditional publishing, it's pretty obvious that they have no clue.
Yeah.
They'd be selling a lot more books if they did have a clue.
Hmm.
So anyway, but yeah, that's kind of where that is. And again, for me, it's more of a personal, you know, because I said I could kind of thing to
Yeah.
to maybe get an agent's interest in a trad pub deal. But you know, I'm not holding my breath. I'm not
Yeah.
15 anymore. I'm not 25 anymore. I have a limited number of years left, and I am not a rapid writer. I do not do rapid release stuff. Can't churn out 6 books a year. So, I'd like to get as many stories out there as I can.
Yeah.
And that's really going to lean on indie publishing because the lead time for trad is ridiculous. So,
Hmm.
2 to 5 years.
What would you say are some advantages or disadvantages to both? Like, if you were to like, this is would be an advantage to traditional publishing versus indie publishing.
Yeah. Well, at the initial stages, they're an awful lot alike. You have someone advocating for you if you have an agent and you're going the trad pub route, and that can be pretty helpful. But they can't always do everything. They can't always make things happen for you. You s- with one of the disadvantages to trad pub is you go through the hell of querying agents and trying to get an agent. And then once you get an agent, you go through the exact same thing all over again as your agent pitches publishing houses.
Hmm.
And you may or may not get picked up. So again, it's a crapshoot. You don't know. You don't know if you'll see that work in print ever.
Yeah.
Um, I know people who are traditionally published who have been told, well, we really like your next set of story ideas, but because your last set of story ideas didn't sell well, we're going to make you use a pen name
Hmm.
because, we don't want to associate your name with, a new series, which makes some assumptions that I feel like are faulty in
Hmm.
terms of how people look at books. So, but anyway, so there's that stuff. So that's all the negative stuff. The on the plus side is if you can break through and get the kind of deal that gets you enough money where you can make writing your job.
Hmm.
I think the big drawback, and we've kind of alluded to this already, the big drawback to indie publishing is that everything is your job.
Yeah.
Writing is your job, editing is your job, marketing is your job, figuring out how to get everything uploaded to all the vendors is your job, tracking that is your job, accounting is your job.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's exhausting. And there
You're
have been
basically
times
running a small business.
you
Yeah.
literally are an entrepreneur, you're running a business,
Hmm.
and that's what it is. But the flip side of that, if you go into trad pub, is again, people are not, unless you're Lee Bardugo or Stephen King or somebody who has made a name for yourself in indie publishing and has a massive following and a bunch of people who will buy your book the instant it drops, then you're not really going to get a lot of help. You're not going to get a lot of marketing support. You're going to get an editor who's really good, but they may or may not want to change significant things about your work. And you
Hmm.
may not have a say in that. You may not have a say in what your cover looks like or what your title is.
Hmm.
And if that's stuff that's important to you, then it's, worth it to stick on the indie side. Um, but again, TradPub, they have great editors. And
Yeah.
that I think they are really good at making your book the best it can possibly be, but you have to get there.
Yeah.
And that can be a hard slog.
Well, and it just makes me think too about, anything creative. So like my wife owns a dance studio. And so you go to competitions or you do whatever.
Hmm.
But anything creative is so subjective. So you go to one competition and they love it. You go to the next one and they hate it. And then same with, you could get this one agent and they shop to a couple publishers. And it could even be as simple as which person you talk to that day.
Hmm.
You know, you talk to one person, they would have loved it, but you talk to this person, they didn't like it.
Yeah.
So it's so hard to quantify.
Hmm.
How do you know if it's good? How do you know if the publisher thinks, it's just impossible.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy. And I mean, from folks other writers that I know who have pursued TradPub, there was one editor at one publishing house that would do open calls from time to time. And this person didn't like anything. She hated everything that was ever sent to her. I couldn't find one person who had ever sent her anything that she had given positive feedback. And that person's name actually became identified as like the we'll just make up a name. We'll call her Deborah. That wasn't her name. The Deborah problem.
Yeah.
The Deborah problem. And when that editor quit, I got dozens of emails on email chains from people saying the Deborah problem is over. Everybody send your manuscripts to this publisher.
Yeah.
Send them again because we know nobody ever saw them because she hated everything.
Hmm.
And it
Makes you
was
one
crazy.
makes you wonder what she was looking for. Like what would have been the thing that she liked.
Yeah, it really does. And I actually had kind of established a little bit of a relationship with her on social media on the platform that is now a giant dumpster fire. And had asked her specifically, "What are you looking for?" And her response was, "I just want to feel committed to a story."
That's easy to quantify. Yeah.
You okay?
Yeah.
What can you say to that? And I'm like, all
Yeah.
right. We would like to feel that you're committed to our stories too, lady.
Hmm.
But yeah, so it again, it goes back to that kind of how do you break in and stuff, and we certainly have some of that stuff on the indie side with issues around the vendors. Some of the vendors have these moments where they just make it a lot harder for people than it really needs to be.
Hmm.
And of
Yeah.
course, there's always the threat that Amazon will cancel your account for no apparent reason. So
Yeah. I've seen some horror stories about that where all of a sudden they just lock you out and it's like, oh,
Mhm.
you know.
Oh,
Yeah.
hey, giving our customer an oh God, what was the phrase? Uh, an unexpected experience or I can't remember exactly. And I was a little concerned because these idiots, despite all of the work that goes into choosing the categories and pinning down all that information and the keywords and the descriptions and stuff and all the work that they ask you to do up front to describe your book, they
Hmm.
turned around and put my book in the colonization science fiction, which it is not.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, if you want to take my book down because it's giving people an inaccurate experience, I believe I know who to point to for that, and it's not me. It's not
Right.
the description of my book. So,
Yeah.
yeah, crazy stuff like that that you can't really control.
Yeah. Yeah. There's pluses and minuses to dealing with all of them, and you just kind of have to do your best. And I like the idea of indie because you do have more freedom and control. But
Yeah,
there's like you said, there's downsides to that too, and it's hard to.
and it's
I,
expensive.
yep, it's expensive, and it's how do you account for all the things that could happen or anything like that.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people have said to me, "Oh, you should just do a Kickstarter like Brandon Sanderson did."
Yeah, that was a little bit of an outlier, I think.
Little bit, little
Yeah.
bit.
So we're coming up here close to an hour. So I want to have a little time to one more question. I kind of asked this as the kind of the end question is what are your kind of two or three, like if you're going to give some advice to a new author and someone new to writing, what are those two or three big tips that you'd be like, do these things?
Okay. Well, the biggest thing is don't let anybody else tell you how to write. Uh, there are people who are plotters who feel like all pantsers are idiots. There are people who are pantsers or discovery writers who feel like all plotters are rigid and boring. The reality is people are different and they write differently, and you have to do whatever works for you, and never mind what that person on YouTube that you love and admire says about your writing style. Just because they don't like it doesn't mean that it's wrong. There isn't a wrong way. So that's number one. Number two is keep going, keep writing, keep putting words down, even if you don't like them, even if you think they are crap. Because I can tell you right now, every person I know, and these are people who are very accomplished writers who've produced a lot of great indie books and trad writers too, every single one of them has thought that what they were working on was the biggest pile of garbage they'd ever seen ever in their lives. So that's number two. Keep going, and no matter what. The third thing, and I think this is really important, is to figure out where to get constructive criticism and
Hmm.
help, and get it and use that to make your writing better. You know, writing gets better as you write more, and that's one of the great things about it. But a lot of times we're too close to our work. We can't see the obvious flaws in it. And that's going to take someone else who has your best interest at heart. And that's not always a random critique group person, okay?
Hmm.
Somebody who has your best interest at heart to read your book, somebody who knows how to give constructive criticism to help you out, to look at stuff, to give you honest feedback so you can go in and make the work the best that it can be.
Yeah. And I would add a caveat to that of make sure you're receptive to that
Exactly.
because it can
Exactly.
be really hard being I've been a creative in creative fields for a long time. I've been a musician, I've done all sorts of things. And when you're younger, you definitely struggle with people critique your stuff and you get
Hmm.
defensive and and but you got to be open to like,
Oh,
now
yeah.
it's kind of one of those if I give something to someone, I'm like, rip it up, tear it apart.
Yep.
Like I want to hear the worst things you got about it because
Yep.
that's how you figure it out.
It's I mean, I can equal you on the music thing. I went to art school.
Hmm.
So there is nothing worse than an art graduate program to really introduce you to the idea, first of all, of trying not to be resistant to criticism. And secondly, to understanding that not everybody knows how to give constructive criticism.
Hmm.
There are some people who really focus on the criticism part and don't understand the constructive part.
Hmm.
And that's why it's important to find people who do understand how to give you constructive criticism. Somebody who just comes at you and says, "Well, I hate this," and then doesn't give you any reason why they hate it
Yeah.
is not really doing you a favor. That's not constructive criticism. That's just criticism.
Yeah.
So, if somebody wants to come in and say, "Hey, your pacing feels off in this section, and I think it's because of the dialogue, or I think it's because you got too much world building up here and it feels like an info dump," that's constructive criticism. That's something you can look at the manuscript and you can tweak it and you can figure out how can I move these things around and work with it so that the pacing is better or whatever the issue is.
Hmm.
But I have really hit my limit on people who just want to tell you that what you've done is bad and they don't like it, but they don't have anything useful to say
Yeah.
after that.
Well, and I would say maybe not everyone's like this. I've rarely read or watched something where there wasn't something I liked
Mhm.
or I liked a part, but like you said, it's like I really like this part, but like the world building was a little funny here.
Mhm.
So it wasn't that I disliked it. It was that I liked it, but then this part didn't work.
Mhm.
And so I feel like when people just go, "Well, I hate this." I'm like, "Well, did you like I don't understand where you just blankly dislike it. Like there's
Mhm.
nothing,
Yeah.
there's no nuance to that at all, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's just me.
I think it's a totally valid thing though. People are just not really good sometimes at giving constructive criticism. And it is something that you actually need to practice and learn how to do. And again, with the idea, with the attitude that you have the person who's asking for the critique, you have their best interest at heart, not because you want to make sure your opinion is heard very
Hmm.
loudly across all areas. So, yeah, it's interesting. So I've had some really good experiences with critique partners and editors, and I've had a couple of really bad experiences, one of which with an editor that I was paying a lot of money, so that was not a happy thing. But
Yeah. Yeah.
oh,
Well, this has been really fun. I love talking to you about all this stuff, and I just love talking about all this stuff.
yeah, me
I love
too.
it. So,
I have a
um,
podcast too. Maybe you should come on my podcast sometime.
yeah, I'd love to.
We
Definitely.
can talk about your writing because I feel like I didn't learn enough about that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So why don't you tell us about your podcast? Where can we find you for that? Where can we find your book, social media, all that kind of stuff?
Okay, my podcast is Read Write Geek. It is specifically targeted to writers who are aiming to publish, and most of the time it's going to be indie stuff, but sometimes it'll be trad stuff. I try to do it live because I have a horrible bias toward editing things, and if I do an interview and I have to edit it later, there's a high likelihood that I will die before it will ever get edited. I
Hmm.
had to learn that the hard way. But I try to do that every month. But Read Write Geek, it's on Spotify, it's on iHeartRadio, it's on Amazon Music, and it's also through Podbean if you have the Podbean app. Um, my book is available everywhere you might want to buy books. Whether ebook, paperback, or hardcover, it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Smashwords, just all the places. It's also available to independent bookstores and libraries. So if you, dear listener, want to go into your independent bookstore and ask them to order a copy for you, they can absolutely do that. And the same with your local library. And social media, I'm pretty much Marie Robertson everywhere. You can find me mostly on Instagram. I have a Facebook page for my author stuff too. Again, Marie Robertson author. And every now and then I post a TikTok video, and so far every other one gets a lot of views.
Yeah, TikTok is a whole wild west of I have no idea what works on there. You
Yep,
just
yep.
post stuff, and some stuff goes crazy, and some stuff doesn't.
And it's like I spend hours on something and post it and it gets 400 views. And I'm like, well, I'll just throw this thing up. And 2,000 views later, I'm going like,
Yeah,
what happened?
yeah.
So,
Well, that's great. Well, I'll make sure to put all that stuff down below in the description of this. And
oh,
so,
the discount.
yes,
I created a discount link for listeners of this particular podcast. It will be live from September 6th through October 6th, so you have a whole month. If you want to click on the link that I guess you'll put in the show notes, Brendan, is that right?
yep,
Click on the link in the show notes. You can get a super, super deep discount on my hardcover with dust jacket for a month, and that's just for listeners of this podcast.
awesome. Well, we will put it down there, and we'll have it on all the videos that come out of this, and it'll
Super.
be great.
Super duper. Thanks so much
Yeah,
for having me on, Brendan. I really enjoyed it. And I definitely want to have you on my podcast too, so we can talk about
yeah,
your writing and what's happening with you, because that's very cool. And the bookstore. That's
yes,
really
in the
cool.
bookstore. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and yes, I'd love to be on. So we'll talk about that for sure.
We'll
So
connect about that. Great.
yeah. Thank you everyone for watching this episode of Writing Quest, and make sure to check out all those things below, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Brendan.